Hello, welcome back to the channel. I've got a quick review of the new Disney Plus original movie Flora and Ulysses here for you today. I just watched this movie. It dropped today on Disney Plus, and I thought I'd talk about it because it's not too often anymore I get to talk about new movies. This movie is based on a kid's book of the same name that follows a young girl and a superpowered squirrel. And this movie is exactly what you think it is. If you think you'd like it, you'll probably like it. And if you don't think you'll like it, you probably won't. I can't say I didn't like it because it was exactly what I expected, but I guess I'd say I did. I don't know. It was just so exactly what I thought it was, if you know what I mean. And it wasn't for me, which I know is super easy to say about kids' movies, but I think it's true in this case. It's just kind of generic, not in a terrible way. It doesn't do anything that hasn't been done, but it does things well enough that I think it's passable. It has some sweet moments, and overall, I thought it was okay. I'm going to talk more about it, but the gist is, if this looks like something that you're going to like, you probably will, and vice versa. One thing that did subvert my expectations in a bad way is that Ulysses barely does anything. First of all, I thought he would talk for some reason. I wasn't bothered by the fact that he didn't talk, but what sort of did bother me is that he barely did anything with his superpowers. We saw him use them maybe 3 times, and I don't know, he doesn't really do anything, which is fine. It's just he's not the center of this movie in any way, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but I think it could have benefited from a few more fun scenes with Ulysses using his powers. Also, the squirrel is always CGI, which I guess it would be jarring to go back and forth. But Disney has done this a lot recently, where they'll have animals that are fully CGI, where maybe they could have incorporated something practical. I don't know if trained squirrels are a thing in the way that trained dogs are a thing. I just feel like it could have benefited from having something real, especially for a cat that is in this movie named Mr. Claus. That CGI was weird. I think they could have benefited from a real cat at one point or another when it came to that character. So I mentioned before, this movie really isn't about Ulysses at all, and that's because it's a family story centered around this young girl and her 2 parents, played by Ben Schwartz and Allison Hannigan, who I think are 2 extremely funny actors. I've loved them in other stuff, and they're not bad in this movie. I just feel like they've toned down their performances so much that they're not as funny as they could have been. I feel like, and I think part of it is intentional, where in the beginning of the movie, like, they're supposed to be hopeless and sort of lost their excitement for life and stuff, and that's like the point of the movie, and that's, you know, Ulysses comes along and shows this family how to be a family again, and that's not really a spoiler, because this is that kind of a movie, so you know what I'm saying. But I just feel like these 2 actors, who I think are extremely funny and extremely talented, have sort of dialed back. And I think part of it was intentional, but I think they played certain things too subdued. I think it could have been funnier if they just sort of went for it. But speaking of the family story, it's very generic. Sort of this thing where you know, a kid is scared that their parents are going to get a divorce, and you know the gist. But this movie kind of does it well. I especially like the relationship between Ben Schwartz as the dad and then the young girl. I should have looked her name up, but that's okay. Speaking of the young girl, she talks like Greg from Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and I don't know how to explain that, but if you hear both of their voices, they have very similar voices. I don't know how to further explain that. In terms of this movie being based on a book, I didn't grow up with the book. I've never read it. There are certain lines in this movie that feel like they were lifted from that book, and you can usually tell when that's happening in movies, especially with movies that are based on kids' books. Like a book like a kid's book will have a line that the author thought was really clever. And then when they put in a movie, you're kind of like, that was the line that was on the back cover of the book, I think. It's not a big deal. It's just something I noticed. Something else that I just thought was funny is one of the kids who was blind for part of the movie. I won't say whether or not he regains his sight, but he at one point mentions that he pushed a car into a lake because he didn't like his stepdad. And I seriously thought that he pushed the car in the lake while his stepdad was in it. But no, he just pushed the empty car into a lake because he didn't like. But I thought that was funny. And then, okay, this last thing I'm going to talk about isn't super relevant to the movie, but I thought it was interesting. This story is based around a superhero squirrel. And so they reference comic books a bunch. And of course, it's mostly Marvel comics that they're referencing, although she pulls out a couple issues of Batman, which I thought was kind of random, but I guess it'd be a little on the nose if they just did Marvel. But it opens, and she's talking about Silver Surfer and Wolverine for like a good minute. Which I thought was really interesting because, and I'm not suggesting this is somehow connected to the MCU, but but maybe Disney is laying the groundwork for a younger generation to know who those characters are. I mean, you have this kid describing Silver Surfer and Wolverine and their powers. I just felt like, okay, you could have done Captain Marvel and Iron Man, but you chose these characters who haven't been in the Disney canon of Marvel yet. And I thought maybe you're sort of sticking that into kids' minds. I thought that was interesting. There are a ton of Disney and Marvel and Star Wars references in this movie. Maybe a little too much. And I mean, I dig references, but it felt a little bit like cross-promotion. It felt a little like product placement for Disney within Disney. It felt a little on the nose. She has a Alien from Toy Story button on her backpack. The owner of a comic book store is wearing a Kylo Ren t-shirt, one that I happen to own. I should have worn it for this review, but I was like, that's my shirt. I bought it at Hot Topic, and this character in the movie's wearing it. There's the Marvel comic stuff I mentioned before. Their doorbell plays the Imperial March from Star Wars, and they make a vague reference to that. The dad is playing with a X-Wing that he made out of office supplies at one point, and what was the last thing? Oh, and then the girl says, "I love you 3000" to her dad. I guess you could argue in universe these are characters who would be nerds. It's just kind of interesting that Disney exists in this Disney movie. I don't know. It's not inherently a bad thing. And it was kind of fun to notice that stuff. But again, it's just kind of, you did a lot of that. You know what I mean? So anyway, this movie was fine. It was, I don't know. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars, which maybe is harsh because it had a few sweet moments between the family. It just felt too generic. It was just sort of exactly what you'd expect. Sort of a low budget, dropped on Disney Plus, not much promotion type of thing. So if you think you'll like it, check it out. It's fun enough. I think kids might like it, but I don't know. It's okay. Anyway, check out my other reviews. I talk about a ton of Disney, Marvel, Star Wars, Harry Potter, DC, everything nerdy and movie related. So go watch that stuff and subscribe. And thank you for watching. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.